As Gary said, my name is George Bowser. I am Senior Director of Solution Design for DHL Supply Chain. Most of you probably know us by another name, that is Excel. We have been Excel in the U.S. We got acquired by DHL about 10 years ago, and we finally got around to changing the signs. So what I want to talk about today is really DHL's pilot on vision picking and kind of where we stand with the technology. We've really gone about making an investment in this technology because we believe that there are huge advantages to be gained here. And what's more, we believe that this could potentially be a game changer in the distribution environment. A little bit about Excel/DHL. We are the biggest third-party logistics provider in the world. I work for the supply chain division, so no, I don't handle packages. In North America, we have about 400 operating warehouses at about 115 million square feet of space. So we are big. My daytime job is I run part of our North American solution design team, and that is designing networks, designing warehouses, going out and selling them and implementing them. My part-time job is I'm the global practice lead for automation. So I've got a group of people located around the world, and we get to do cool, fun things that I still can't believe they pay me to do. Things like playing with vision picking, playing with glass, playing with that kind of technology. We've got robots, we've got automated guided vehicles, and then hearkening back to some of the earlier conversations, we're also working on technologies such as warehouse execution systems that really are brilliant systems that sit in warehouses and can run the continuous optimization and the waveless and autonomously direct people to go various places. So a little bit about our vision picking pilot. I want to talk briefly about what the project is and kind of about vision picking, and then talk about what our current global pilot looks like, and talk about the initial global pilot that we ran back at the end of 2014. Talk about some other applications, key takeaways, and then I am open for questions. So really, augmented reality versus vision picking, it's an important distinction to make. You know, true augmented reality gets to the point where you can't really tell what's real versus what's computer generated, and we're not there yet. We're not going there yet. But where we can go is we can go with a heads-up display. And the cool thing about that technology is it's really, it is still computer-generated information, but because of the capabilities of the devices, it's a nice combination of the best features of a wearable RF, a voice-picking technology, and it adds the capability of having a persistent head-mounted display that you can see without having to turn your head to go look at something. So when we talk about augmented reality versus vision picking, a lot of times it gets to be interchangeable, but it's really not. It's really just a heads-up display. That's the first step toward augmented reality. The next step toward augmented reality expands the use cases in the distribution center and gets really interesting. But for now, this is where we are, and it's something we've been investing in. So there's a link later in the presentation here to our trend research report that we published in June of 2014 about augmented reality in the logistics field. And so if you have the chance, I would encourage you to go out and take a look at that. It's a pretty healthy PDF, pretty healthy booklet if you can get a physical copy of it. And it talks about a lot of different capabilities and a lot of use cases for this kind of technology. So right now we're in a current global pilot. It's focused on rolling vision picking technology out to about half a dozen operations this summer. We are not approaching it as a traditional pilot. We are approaching this as the first set of implementations, and we're going to see how this goes. We're going to give this technology, frankly, a really good run for its money to say, how much does it improve productivity? How much does it change quality? How fast does it make it to train people to bring people into the environment? We've got some e-commerce operations that we run, one in particular for a certain large toy company that we normally run with 200 people. But at peak season, we have to expand that to 2,400 people. So the ability to bring people on and train them and get them effective is really a key thing in how you are able to hit those must-win days in an e-commerce environment. So let's talk about some existing picking technologies because it's important to know kind of where we're starting from to figure out, how this applies and how this fits in. So 3 technologies that are up here. There's the traditional RF picking, there's voice picking, and then there's pick-to-light. And they all are good at different things. and there's different costs that go along with them. You know, RF is kind of the traditional way to do it. It's the easiest, most flexible thing to implement. Our friends from Zebra, who we do a lot of good work with, would be more than happy to sell you a couple of hundred RF devices. They're very flexible. The challenge with it is it's not the most productive thing out there. Voice is somewhere in the middle. It is a little more expensive. The accuracy does go up, but the flexibility starts to get impaired. And then the last technology out there is lights. And you can pick really fast with lights, really good productivity. It's expensive, but once you install it, it stays there. And you may have to go somewhere else. So that's the environment kind of where we're starting from. So let's talk about how vision picking applies here. Really, like I said before, it combines some of the best capabilities of a lot of the other technologies that are out there, with the goal being to make it more than the sum of where we started from. What it eliminates, you know, when you talk about picking, there's really two areas of picking that you're working on. One is actually physically selecting the item. The other one is traveling to go get the next item. Normally what we'll do in our operations, if we want to make them more efficient, we'll cut down on the travel time. We'll reslot, we'll implement a goods-to-person solution, we'll do things to cut down on that travel time, but that doesn't really change how long it takes to grab things. What this technology does is it significantly impacts how long it takes to do the actual process of grabbing an item and picking an item. And so there are reasons why it does that. One is, you're not doing this all the time. And our standard solutions that we use in our facilities are really very much based on wearable RF technology. So the 4700s that are out there on Zebra's table that have a sleeve and you wear them on your arm and it's got a wired ring scanner to it, that's standard for us. But in this technology, like I said, you're not doing this all the time. You're not having to remember what you just looked at and okay, it's this location and I got to go find that and it's over here. It's up in your head-mounted display the whole time. So it's also nice because you can scan a bunch of different ways. So my friends at Vuzix out there and my friends at Zebra were kind enough to let me borrow a couple of devices. And so I'll use them as a prop. So this is an M100. This has been out for 2.5 years. We'll start with this and a Google device in our pilot. You can scan with a camera or you can scan with a ring scanner. In our case, we're actually going to implement the ring scanners as well, because if you're trying to scan a location, sometimes you don't want to get down and do this. It's just not really practical. So while, yes, you can use a camera to do all this, there may be applications where you want to use other technologies and you're using a combination of technologies, which is what we plan to do. So, let's find the button here. So the other nice thing about this is, similar to a lot of other technologies, it can be language independent. The devices that we're using are all capable of being voice controlled. One of the things that we want to test is how that works in a noisy environment. You know, some of the facilities that we'll use this in are relatively quiet. It's a cart pick operation. There's not a whole lot of other stuff going on. But some of our facilities have lots and lots of conveyor and forklifts making noise and all that other kind of stuff. So from a practical standpoint, how does it work when you've got those noises around you? There are other capabilities that make this unique as well, and I'll point you to the bottom screen there. So when you pick something, you bulk pick it, you go to actually put it, and we're going to start out in a cart-based environment. It's a relatively standard each picking type of base solution. There's not, you know, your mechanization is I got a cart I'm pushing with some boxes on it. So the catch with it is, how do you pick a bunch of different things and then accurately sort those things out to several different orders that may need that same item? So the solution that we're using from our friends at Ubimax, actually when you pick it, it shows a picture or a schematic of that pick card in your field of vision, and you color code the carts to match the color codes of the schematic. So that way when the operator picks it, it can show them, hey, I need, you know, one item in the upper right, it's yellow, I need one item in the middle, next level down blue, and I need another item in the lower right that's also yellow, and it gives them a visual cue on how to do things. And then the operator uses voice commands to confirm that they've done it, and they move on to the next task. So when you talk about how do you make the actual process faster, and that's kind of a hard thing to explain without experiencing it. So I've got a chart here that kind of shows that. And each of the steps on the current process, you know, you want to figure out where you're going, so you log into the device, you walk to the location, you say, okay, I've got to look at what I've got to pick, okay, I grab it, I scan it, etc. So there's a lot of interaction back and forth. You're scanning, you're looking, you're placing, you're grabbing. What vision technology we believe will allow us to do is take those individual steps out, to take seconds out of the process. So over the course of a day, if you've got 10, 20, 30 pickers, you're picking, tens of thousands of lines a day, that number starts to add up and you start to see significant savings. So we're very much on the cusp of getting ready to implement this technology, and we believe that it's going to be a significant boost to our productivity. So where are we now? As of today, this is kind of where we're at with some updates. We are partnering with Ubimax. I've got one of my friends from Ubimax here in the back of the room, and they are one of the leading global providers of this kind of technology. We are starting with a focus on cart-based each picking of multiple orders. Again, it's something we do a lot. To this point in the game, we have not been comfortable putting these devices on the heads of forklift operators. In some of our sites, we're going to try that, but for any of you who have much familiarity with warehouses, if you build it, they will hit it. And so we don't really want to give them another excuse for why they hit it. So at some point, yes, we may get there. As the devices continue to develop, as we get see-through devices, then we may choose to be more comfortable in moving into that arena. But for right now, we're starting out with pedestrians. We're using both Manhattan and JDA Red Prairie. Fun fact about DHL, we are the biggest worldwide user of both Manhattan and Red Prairie. So in our pilots that we're running over in Europe, one of those pilots is going to be on a customer system. The rest of those pilots are going to be on JDA. For the initial pilot here in North America, we're going to be running it on Manhattan I-Series. For our pilot, and then we've got a subsequent one in the US that will run on JDA. For our pilots that are going to be running over in Asia Pacific, those will be running generally on Manhattan, and usually it's WMOS. We also run scale a little bit over there as well. So again, back to the point, we're trying to make this a real live go live, not just a one-off pilot. So we're using all the different technologies that we have in place, and they're good for different things. So we're talking about sites. Like I said, we've got 2 here in the US, a couple over in Europe, a couple in the UK. Timing, this is where it gets interesting. Our first major go live in the UK happens next week. The go live here in North America is going to be happening the week after the 4th of July for the initial one. And then the other go lives we'll have on this pilot will happen basically from the end of June into the end of August. So, a lot of people talk about new cool technologies, and some of the others have been up here and said, yes, they're doing stuff in their facilities. And, you get a lot of tours, you get a lot of people interested in doing it. So we've got multiple sites going on a global pilot that are on the verge of going live right now. So let's talk a little bit about architecture and devices. So I mentioned before, we're starting out with a combination of the M100s and the RS507s from Zebra. The thing about it is, you've also got to be carrying around one of these as you walk around all day, because the onboard batteries just don't cut it for a shift. So, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen out on the Vuzix table, they've got the next generation of devices with the battery on board, so you can walk around with this thing on your head and you don't have to have a vest on or some other external battery. So the technology from a device standpoint is really getting there. Like I said, we won't start out with the M300s, we'll start out with the base model, and then we'll transition to the more advanced technology as we go. We will be using a combination of Vuzix and Google, but Google's like Fight Club. You can't really talk about Google. From an integration standpoint, with Ubimax, the way this architecture of the integration is, we've got our WMS instances in our data centers. In the case of the US, our data centers in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, which is Harrisburg, basically. The Ubimax server, we've got one server regionally, also in that same data center. We've got another regionally in Prague in our other data center over in Europe. And so you've got the WMS talking to the server back and forth, and then that server is sending information actually out to the field devices through our WAN. So that's architecturally how we've got this thing set up. As this technology continues to develop, there will be other approaches that don't look like this from a setup standpoint. This is all very, very bleeding edge, especially when you talk about large commercial implementations like we're doing now. So while this is the way this one is set up, over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, wouldn't surprise me for the whole thing to be on your smartphone. Fundamentally, those glasses, they're smartphones. It's got the same kind of processor, it's got the same kind of RAM, it's got a display on it, it's got all the things your smartphone can do. So rather than having a telnet world where you've got to go back and forth every time you need to do something to the WMS in classic 1970s technology, now you're talking about having everything you can do on your smartphone sitting on board. So what does that mean from a change in how you run the business? That means that I don't have to go back to validate everything every single time I scan something. I can download the initial information of the device and do onboard validation of the device. What kind of other onboard processing can I do to that device and either not worry about an RF network in the facility that maybe isn't has great a coverage as it could have, or are there other things that we can do on these devices? So a huge part of this pilot, like I said, we're going to give this technology a run for its money. And so what does that mean? How do we judge whether or not this is a technology that we want to really continue to implement, and instead of rolling it out in a 10 or 15 user environment, which is safe and relatively contained as an initial go live, how do we roll it out in that environment that has 2,000 people working at it around Thanksgiving? And so we want to measure a bunch of different things. The first and foremost, being a business case driven organization, is we want to understand the impact it has on productivity. We had a very good first pilot, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so we're going to see what the impact is here. So we're very religiously tracking productivity, and we live and die by LMS. And so what we think it's going to be about a 10 to 15% uptick in picking productivity, which, it initially doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when, you have to do that kind of an improvement on an annual basis just to stay ahead, it's a nice uptick. It's a good size uptick. We're also going to measure accuracy. So what we found on our initial pilot was that accuracy actually went up even though the amount of scanning and the amount of verification went down. And that's because of some of the features of that visual display in front of your eyes, being able to say, okay, where does this go? I can see a schematic right here. I don't have to remember where I put that order on the cart and then go look for it on the cart and then scan it to make sure I put it in the right place. All of that is time that, A, we're taking out, but B, we're giving the operators the ability for them to very quickly link what they're seeing in the real world versus what they're seeing systematically, and they can match that stuff easier, and it ends up being more accurate. One of the other things that we're talking about a lot is ergonomics. Some of these devices to start out with are kind of heavy on one side, so you're going to walk around like this all day picking, or your neck's going to hurt, or your eye's going to be differentially dilated like the conversation this morning. So we want to understand what impact this has on our pickers, and so we've got questionnaires that we will have before we start the process, as we go through the pilot, as we come to the end of the initial 8 weeks, so that we can understand and get anecdotal information out of our pickers to see whether they like it or not, what they do like, what they don't like, so we can continue to improve the process. Some other things we're tracking, one of the things is network performance on the T1 line. So we've done some baseline work to say, here's what our network traffic looks like right now, back and forth between our site and the WMS server. And so we'll track that with this as well and see if it's greater or less. And then finally, the last one is a really important one, new user training. Again, back to the fact that this device is a paradigm shift. So one of the capabilities you can do with this device is say, okay, I've got a user profile set up for user A and user B. And user A's been here for 5 years and they really know what the process is, and I really don't have to tell them what to do. They're a good picker. But user B maybe walked in off the street yesterday. And how do I get that person up to speed? So if you're using a regular RF device, you've got to memorize a whole lot of crazy controls to get that device to perform. So, okay, I need to do this, so I've got to hit blue shift 2 to get this function to work. Now I can talk to that device in normal language that I don't have to do crazy learnings on. But what you can do beyond that, because you've got that persistent display in front of them, is you can give them a list of instructions. And some of the case studies we've seen up here, it pulls up and it shows you the list of available commands you can use there. You can also feed that person a list of instructions to say, at this step in the process, do this. For the advanced users, they don't need it. You take it off their profile. For the new users, it's a nice thing to be, and the goal is to plop this on somebody's head, give them about a 15, 20, or 30-minute tutorial, and here's how you use the device, and say, okay, go have fun with it. And it helps that user along so that the user can be very effective to start with. Because back to that example, that e-commerce site we run, when you go from 200 people to 2,400 people for 3 or 4 weeks, the last tail of those people aren't real productive. If you're getting 30% out of them, you're lucky. So how do you take that tail end of people, and instead of making them 30% productive, make them 50, 60, 70% productive, and then you need fewer people at peak season. So a little bit on our pilot. We did this initial pilot with Ricoh. If you go on YouTube, you look up DHL Ricoh, the copier company, it'll pop you right up to the video that we did on the pilot. I would encourage you to go look at it. Like I said, it was late 2014, so it's a little bit old, but the customer liked it enough that Ricoh is one of the permanent sites that we're going to implement this technology in, and that's on their system. It was originally a 3-week pilot. It was offline. It was a very contained startup. But we wanted to prove, yes, this is something we should proceed with, or no, this is something that really doesn't make sense. And what we found out was it's got a really interesting technology, and the qualitative and quantitative results were very good. In that pilot, we experienced about a 25% productivity increase for each picking. That comes with a caveat that the base process they were using wasn't as good as our normal base process. It was a combination of paper pick and an RF unit to do inventory decrement from the locations. The pilots we're doing in this case are actually against our good normal base processes, which is why we don't think the productivity is going to be quite as good, but we think it's still going to be significant. What was interesting was the qualitative results and the user feedback. The users really liked it. I mean, yeah, there's the cool factor, and that gets people interested. That's why we're all, part of the reason why we're all here, because there's a big cool factor with this technology. But the users very quickly got over the initial coolness factor and actually, used it on a daily basis. So as we go through this pilot, it's ostensibly an 8-week pilot. So we'll start out and we'll track user productivity, we'll track acceptance, we'll get the surveys, whether they like it or not. But the goal here is these are the first set of go lives again. So based on these results, we think it'll be very successful. There are, as a lot of the other speakers have mentioned today, there are other applications for this technology. And in our world, just fulfilling each pick orders is not everything we do. We have a bunch of mechanized sites. We have thousands and thousands of forklifts. So how we apply this from a maintenance standpoint is really interesting. And a number of the companies out here already have viable working solutions for this particular need. It's really, really interesting. The other area we think we can use it is around value-added services. We do that for a lot of our customers, whether that is theory of postponement, where you're not packaging things until you absolutely need them in a particular format, or whether that is large CPG customers where you're taking a couple things and you're putting them together for a promotion. Whatever that is, there's really a value here in using it for our value-added services. I get a box. What am I supposed to do with it? Okay, scan the box. Oh, great. Here's what you're supposed to do with it, and here's the step process you go through to do that VAS work. The other thing, and again, this is things that others have mentioned before, optimized product placement. We run a lot of CPG customer warehouses where it's case pick to pallet. If any of you have done that, it is an art form to stack that pallet in a way that it doesn't tip over and in a way that it's very efficient. So how do we take that out of the art arena and put it into the repeatable practice arena? So we believe there's potential here for that. And then the final one is around vehicle loading. I admit it, I grew up at UPS. It is not easy to load trucks. And so how you place things so that the whole thing doesn't come tumbling down on top of you, again, it takes learning. It's a bit of an art form. So key takeaways. DHL believes that this technology has a huge applicability in our operations. And remember, I'm just in supply chain. We've also got freight. We've also got DHL Express. We are the German post office, Deutsche Post. So there are other areas of our business that once we can prove that it works in supply chain, we can take it into other parts of the business as well. But we believe it's got a lot of potential. And it has the potential to be the next big thing. You know, instead of people walking around with big heavy RF units on their arms, they can walk around with these things on their head and it makes them more productive. That's got a lot of economic potential. When you figure that RF unit with the scanner and everything is about $3,000, that's about the same as these head-mounted displays are, within, you know, give or take. So if the economics are the same to actually buy it and implement it, and yet I can make somebody a lot more efficient doing it, there's a really good business case to do that. It is bleeding edge, however. And so that's why DHL has chosen to invest a pretty substantial sum of money out of our corporate IT department in the development of this technology to take it from bleeding edge to something that, frankly, hopefully by the end of the year, is a product that we can sell. Because again, we're a 3PL, we sell services to others. And we're in competition with other 3PLs. If we can come in and we can say, hey, look, you know, here's our proposal, and they say, well, why is your labor cost for picking 10% less than everybody else? Okay, well, that's because we use better technology. And fact of the matter is, again, there's a coolness factor here. My boss got quoted in an article in the Wall Street Journal back in August on this pilot, and it's amazing. Customers start coming out of the woodwork. Hey, we want to get in on this. We really want to talk to you about this. We've got conversations going with customers because of this innovation stuff that we do, that they want to put together a site over in Europe that is an everything in its brother site around technology. It's AGVs, it's robots, it's vision picking, it's Internet of Things, it's all of that stuff in place. So yes, we want to sell it. Yes, we want to implement it. We absolutely want to gain competitive advantage from it. But we also want to build a brand with these technologies. And the last thing is the market's immature. You know, in 5 years, is anybody willing to guess what this conversation is going to look like in 5 years? How about 2 years? So we want to help develop it and want to help direct it for where it goes, whether an architecture stays or an architecture goes, whether a hardware manufacturer stays or a hardware manufacturer goes, it's still going to continue to develop and it's going to continue to be a cool thing. So I mentioned this before. I would encourage you all to go out and look at it. We actually have a whole suite of trend radar reports, and we've got a bunch of these trend reports on various topics. Vision picking is only one of them. You want to talk about robotics, you want to talk about self-driving vehicles, you want to talk about Internet of Things. I would encourage you to go out. The web link is on here. Look up dhl.com, type in trend research, and it'll send you right to where you're going. But it's really worthwhile reading, and it's not DHL centric. It's where the industry stands in each of these topics. So with that, hit me with your best shot.
I work for a global company just like you, so anything that I develop or deploy has to go globally. So
Yes.
I like the fact that you're saying that voice interaction is probably the most natural interaction with the technology. You've got that pilot in Asia. How well does that work when the user speaks with an accent when they're speaking English or doesn't speak English at all?
And we're not suggesting it does. Truth of the matter is, where we're implementing it here, half those people speak Spanish. Some of them don't hardly speak English at all. The question is, how well does it work in the other languages? So the devices and the software companies have their own voice decoding engines. And so what you end up having to do, you end up having to set up a voice library that says, here's the available list of voice commands. Ideally, you get that down to the individual process step and says, here's the available list at this step in the process. And so the voice decoding technology for when you scan the user barcode, so we're going to have a QR code on the back of the user's time card. And so to log into the device, they're going to scan that QR code. In the server, it's set up to say, here's the language that person is using or prefers to use. And then that goes as part of their profile.
What would really be nice is rather than the user creating that lookup table for languages, why not use like Google Translate or other services out there that can do that for us?
We could.
I like being able to deploy to another country or non-English speaking people with zero premium for me. No
Yep.
overhead, right?
Well, and that's the thing. We're a huge global company, so you're right. It's how you do that kind of stuff. And again, that's on the server side right now for us because of how we're integrating with Ubimax. They're not a U.S. company. Those guys live in Germany. So making it work in German, making it work in whatever language they speak over in the UK. So, you know, sorry if you're British. But the goal is, you know, even in U.S. operations, the U.S. is mostly an English language speaking environment. We do have some operations in Quebec. We have a very, very diverse workforce. Just in our Columbus campus, we have a huge group of Somalis that work for us. So given the ability to do all that, it's a really cool feature.
We've been doing speech. My name is Jeff Jacobson. I'm from Kopin Corporation. We've been doing speech for about 10 years now. We've gotten it down to where it'll operate in almost any spoken language, including we've done some demonstrations with Klingon. We get about 98% efficiency, and in U.S. military trials, we've stood next to a jet engine, and I've spoken very quietly like this, and it still works.
Who are you with?
Kopin, K-O-P-I-N Corporation. We've done trials with Verizon at several dozen companies, and even on the demo units, they would come automatically with 7 or 8 different languages. So you could move from Mandarin to Japanese to Korean to Spanish to German. And as fast as you can call up My Controls, pick the language, and go back to your main screen, all your text and everything is in your native language. So the work with Mercedes-Benz, for example, on a typical foreign plant, they'll have 11 to 14 different native languages on the floor outside the United States. Typically in the United States, they have 3, German, English, and Spanish. And you can have a guy that speaks Italian standing right next to a guy performing the same functions who naturally speaks German or some other language, Portuguese. And they can access all the data, all the PDFs, any information that they want in their own native language. They found that it made far fewer mistakes when they operate in their normal language. Now, contextually, when you got 2 people doing the same task, they can get by with an impartial or fractional capability in a common language, because they can point to things and they can interpret what the person is trying to show them. Machine can't. The other interesting thing is that if you get rid of all the noise and you use Google Now or you use Siri, it works almost flawlessly. It's the noise and all the other stuff in the environment that screws up. And as far as your accent, we developed what's called a xenolinguistic mutating algorithm. It's a patented. It automatically compensates, so there's no language training to this. You just pick it up and start using it. You can use it in open speech, or you can use it in a command set.
Yep. Thanks. Other questions? Oh.
Paula Pavanchik with Canon. Back-end systems, so you obviously use those specialized, logistic pieces of software, JDA and Manhattan. Have you gone further down the road of looking at, let's call them traditional ERPs, like, I don't know, Oracle, SAP, things of that sort, like deeper integration with what a normal enterprise would use?
We haven't, because we don't interact with our customers that way. So the customers will be running their ERP system. They'll be feeding us, 6 or 7 or 8 interfaces back and forth through what we call DHL link. It's our integration layer with our customers. So from that standpoint, we don't ever deal directly with their ERPs in our facilities. We are only dealing back and forth with the instances of WMS. Sometimes that's our WMS, sometimes it's a customer's WMS. But that's really the level, at least for right now, that we're working with. No more questions. Really? Thank you very much.